Well, good evening. Good evening. Oh, gosh, y'all sound great. I feel like we should be in a Baptist church. Well, we're delighted to be here this evening and share with you this fascinating underwater archaeology right here in Savannah, Georgia. First of all, I would like to thank Coastal Heritage Society for hosting the venue tonight. They've been a wonderful host. Special thanks to Sandra Baxter, CEO, and I think we're going to hear a little bit from Sandra this evening, later on this evening. And also thanks to Daniel McCall, Special Events Coordinator, who helped us with this as well. So this evening, I'm pleased to introduce to you the people that you'll be hearing from tonight. The first is Miss Andrea Farmer. She's participated in numerous archaeological investigations throughout the southeastern United States. She has been with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers since 2010 in various capacities, including as Chief Curator for the Corps' Mandatory Center of Expertise for the Curation and Management of Archaeological Collections. That's a breath. And also Program Manager for the Veterans Curation Program. Ms. Farmer currently serves as an archaeologist for the Savannah District, and in this role, she is the Cultural Resources Lead for various projects and studies, including the Savannah Harbor Expansion Project that you're going to hear about this evening. Ms. Farmer will say a few words about that project in light of the archaeological discoveries being discussed this evening. And would you like to just stand up and show everybody who you are?
Yes, Andrea Farmer, archaeologist.
And then also here this evening is Knoxville, Tennessee-based filmmaker, Mr. Michael Jordan, who has produced more than 30 films about Savannah area history and also archaeology, including the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers educational film about the raising of the Civil War ironclad warship, the CSS Georgia. Mr. Jordan's previous work has been honored with an Edward R. Murrow Award, a Georgia Associated Press Best Documentary Award, and a regional Emmy nomination. He's also the author of 3 books about Savannah history and contributed a chapter to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers official archaeological report on the raising of the CSS Georgia. Mr. Jordan will be showing a clip this evening, or actually several clips this evening, from his filming of the current project's fieldwork in the Savannah River. So in addition, tonight's speakers include Mr. William Wilson and Mr. Stephen James. At the Commonwealth Heritage Group, Incorporated, Mr. William Wilson is head of geophysical and remote sensing survey and directs most field operations for its maritime division. Mr. Wilson has conducted numerous investigations across the eastern United States and the Caribbean, including both underwater and terrestrial projects, and he was instrumental in the recent recovery of the Confederate ironclad CSS Georgia in the Savannah River. Mr. Stephen James is Director of Commonwealth Heritage Group Maritime Division. He has over 30 years' experience as a maritime archaeologist. Mr. James has directed and managed submerged archaeological projects of all types throughout the United States, the Caribbean, and the Pacific, including the search for World War II shipwrecks and aircraft. Having worked extensively with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Savannah District over the years, he recently directed the recovery of the Confederate ironclad CSS Georgia. So, before I introduce you to the speakers, your cell phone reminded me, I'm sorry. Somebody lost a hotel key card. If you can come up and tell me what hotel it's for, you get the prize. And somebody else seems to have lost some keys. If you could tell me how many keys they are, I'll give them back to you. So just, you can see me at the end. Okay, and without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speakers. Let them come forward, please.
Thank you, Rita, for the introduction. Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us tonight on behalf of the Savannah District. We're just so excited to be able to share about this incredible discovery. And our talk is on cannons and cribs, 2 recent Revolutionary and Civil War site discoveries in the Savannah River. So really to start, I have to talk a little bit about the Savannah Harbor Expansion Project because without it, we would not be here tonight. The project is a large deepening project. So you can see here on the slide, there's a very large cargo ship. Well, for the Savannah port, they want to deepen the harbor so that we can have even more river commerce, larger cargo ships coming into the city. And it's gonna bring some really incredible benefits to the Savannah area. So I will go ahead and proceed to the next slide because this is what we're here for tonight, the 2 cannon. So how did we end up finding 15 Revolutionary War cannon in the river? As part of the techniques that they use of dredging in this area, what they would do is take a clamshell dredge that basically scoops up debris on the riverbed, and that's in preparation for a cutter head dredge to come through. Now keep in mind, this is in the area where the CSS Georgia was scuttled during the Civil War. So there is untold number of munition down there. So one, is a kind of a safety issue for those materials to be down there, but also it could severely damage the equipment. So they use the cutter head to go down there, scoop up the material, and then they would deposit it on a scow, which is the metal piece of machinery that has the bars on it. And what would happen is that debris, small things would drop through the bars, and then at the top you would have the debris. You can see a tire, some wood, some cement, rocks. And one morning I woke up to an email that said they had found a cannon through clamshell dredging. Then that afternoon, I'm going to go ahead and proceed to the next slide. So you can see on this slide the location where they found the original cannon, and then the second location where they found additional cannons, very close together. But they felt that they had moved far enough down in the river that they were like, there's nothing here. The CSS Georgia had been in this area. It's probably just a Civil War cannon. We'll just keep moving on. Well, when they pulled up the 2 additional cannon, I got a text that just said 2 cannon and had a photo of them. And I did not know the person well at that time, Bert. I don't think he's here tonight, but I could tell the tone from his text. This was a big deal. We knew that something was going on. So then they moved the dredge even farther down the river where the red dot is that says wooden items. I don't know who was operating the dredge on that day, but they should have played the lottery, because they ended up pulling up even more artifacts. So there were wooden beams that had brass pins in them, and we're like, what do we have here? Is it a shipwreck, multiple shipwrecks? What's going on? So the Savannah District, even though this huge, over $700 million project was put on hold so that we could investigate these sites. So the Savannah District, it really embraces its responsibility under law and regulation like the National Historic Preservation Act. And we put a hold on everything, and then we hired a team of experts to come in and investigate this area. So that's how we had Commonwealth Heritage Groups come in to do sonar surveys, so using remote sensing technologies, diver investigations, and then eventually the recovery efforts. I'll talk a little bit more this evening on what are we going to actually do with these materials later on. But first, I will turn it over to them. So thank you again for coming tonight.
Okay, so I'm Will Wilson. I'm the dirtiest guy. Usually I'm one of the ones out in the field, and I cover the geophysical survey, or sometimes we call it remote sensing. And here you can see we've got 3 instruments along the bottom, and it's obviously, if you've seen the Savannah River, it's not clear. It's not the Caribbean. So we really are sensing things remotely. And each one of these sensors tell us something different. None of them are image-based. The first one is a sonar, a side-scan sonar, and now you can get them on your boat. So it's not as crazy out there as it used to be, but it's still a little bit high-tech. But anyway, it sends out sound information laterally. And what you get in the end, actually, I know it said it's not visual, but it does look like a picture, kind of like a black and white picture. You're getting echoes back. It comes back to the transducer. And yeah, you get light, high points. You get shadows when things are sticking up off the bottom. So, and that ended up being, as you'll see later, kind of our most important sensor for doing the remote sensing in this area. The second is a sub-bottom profiler. If you've been on a boat and you've had a fish finder, this is like a really high-powered fish finder that can penetrate through the bottom so you can see things underneath. It's not great for finding shipwrecks. We really use it more for finding submerged landscapes, things that used to be exposed landforms, for finding prehistoric or pre-contact sites. but the geology, basically, that's more for that. But occasionally we can use it to tie in things like shipwrecks. And the last one on the right is the magnetometer. This is normally most underwater archaeologists' favorite tool. It tells us when there's ferrous metals, iron, steel, and a few others, anything that's magnetically susceptible. But when things are buried, you're not going to see it with the first sonar. If you're lucky, you'll get it with the middle one. But that last one, anything generating a deflection in the magnetic field, so again, you got a big mass of iron, it'll pick it up. And so that's normally great. However, the Savannah River is just full of junk. There's all sorts of stuff. Up until very recently, if you had something break on a ship, you just tossed it overboard. We're a little more aware that that's a bad idea now, but for hundreds of years it was done. So as you'll see, it wasn't as useful, but it did give us a clue into things. This illustrates what we call the discovery area. So Andrea talked about, you had the area towards the southwest where we found the cannons, or where they were recovered, and then further down river, which is northeast in this image, they had the wooden artifacts. So we created a survey cell to run those sensors and just to cover the entirety of the area. If there was anything out there, we wanted to find it. And the image on the right, that's showing the sonar mosaic. So it's a little zoomed out here, but we'll show some other images to give you a better idea. But it looks sort of like a zoomed out photo. I mean, it's kind of, if you took the satellite image and made it the same color tones, it would almost blend together. And then I know you can't see the numbers, but that we have the targets that we had picked out, again, primarily from that side scan sonar from doing that survey. And and on the left, so this is its survey. We're trying to be systematic about it. Each one of those blue lines is a transect, and so we call it mowing the lawn. But you're going at about 4 miles an hour and just chugging along. You've got your 3 instruments in the water, and you run it till it's done. But in order to get good data, you've got your GPS that's giving positions for your different sensors in the water. That's the way to run it. Okay, so with the side scan sonar, we identified anything. Again, we're looking for linear objects because we're looking for cannon primarily. Other things, anchors and whatever else, shipwreck material. But especially in the area where they recovered the cannon, we wanted to know where every single one was. We don't want to miss any. That image in the upper left, great image of a cannon. You can see the muzzle flare on the bottom left and kind of see the breach in the upper right, except it's not a cannon at all. It's a concrete piling. And this was the most cannon of all the targets we had. And we were like, wow, it's way out there, it's big, it's bigger than the other cannons. And then the guy's feeling around on the bottom, he's like, it's really square. So yeah, these things are out there. And then logs, the dredging they're doing right now with the clamshell, it's just constantly, that grate she showed, it's just full of logs. It's a strong tide, so things get pushed around. But here we have what is clearly an anchor, and it actually was an anchor. And then this was just recently recovered from the dredging. So some of these targets that were out and around, not necessarily in the vicinity of the cannon, they're now collecting, and we're able to document them after the fact. But again, it's a very useful tool for this. We know, or we have an idea what we're looking for before the diver gets in there. The magnetometer, again, you can kind of sense things that are buried, but you might not have any idea what you'd be going after except the fact that it's steel or iron. And here's an image of 3 cannon. So you can see kind of a white stripe, vertical, the long shadow, and then there's 2 cannon that you can see just to the bottom right of that. And we've got 2 long guns and 1 short gun, which we'll explain a little bit more later, represented there. But this is, again, what we were looking for. So anything that was cannon-like, we went after. Now, I showed 3 sensors, but there really was a 4th one, and this is kind of the coolest to most people. It's a multi-beam echo sounder. So if you've got, again, a fish finder, you're getting the bottom on there. You know how deep the water is. Multi-beam does a bunch of those at the same time, a bunch of sonar beams out, and in the end, instead of having, a few transects of depths or soundings, you have a 3D point cloud, which you can turn into a surface. You can move it around, zoom in on it, everything else. And if it's high resolution, you can get really detailed information from it. So we went to the multi-beam data in the area, and this was almost more useful than the side scan. Actually, I would say it was more useful in this case than the side scan. The only problem, like with the side scan, things have to be above the bottom. It's not going to pick up anything underneath. But you can clearly see what looks like 5 cannon in this image on the right. It's actually 6. One of the cannon was directly underneath another. I don't know how it happened, but especially getting kicked around by dredges over the years, but there you go. Okay, in addition to the cannon site, we were investigating the Confederate Crib obstructions, and these were just downriver of the CSS Georgia site. And we'll get more into the details, but basically just obstructions. They were quickly built and filled with rubble to stand in the way. But this is a multi-beam image as well, and this is where you can kind of see where they're a little more interesting to look at for a layperson especially, but it's been tilted. North is going up to the upper right. And you have A, B, C, and D. Those are representing 4 different cribs. And with the color scheme, so the blue is the deepest sounding, so we've got the channel towards the bottom. And you can see it's kind of sheer. This has been exaggerated a little bit, but it's pretty close to accurate. I think it's only 2 times the exaggeration. And then as you get higher, you get into the red, so you can kind of clearly see the peaks on each of the obstructions. Once we go through the data, we collect the data, and then there's a processing aspect that takes time. And then we analyze it after the data's been processed and pick out all the targets. Once we've got the targets, then we can do the fun stuff. And so this is an example. This is the CDS dive cruise boat, Skipper 2. And we go to each of the targets. There was a prioritizing of targets, things obviously that we knew were logs or something. We don't want to waste our time on that, but anything that looked like a cannon we went after, anchors, that sort of thing. It's not scuba. This is hard hat. This is it's a newer form of really old technology, but while we're wearing scuba tanks, that's really like an emergency air system. Your air's coming from the surface, but you've also got complete communication constantly with the topside folks, which allows you to, as the diver, to not have to think as much. But also it allows the people on top. We had positioning on the divers, so we knew where they were. So you could be directed, because the diver can't see anything down there. At best, I think we'd get we may have had 1.5 feet on a couple of days, but for the most part, you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. So they're telling you where to go, and then you can get the measurements or whatever information you need to get back topside. In addition to not being able to see anything, we had plenty of other issues that are pretty specifically bad in the Savannah River. Really large freighters. This is one of the busiest ports I know of that we've ever worked in. And unfortunately, the cannon site is square in the middle of the channel. And if you're on a little dive boat, you can guess who wins that chicken fight. But it's not just, we were in contact with the pilots, and so we knew when ships were passing through. Unfortunately, we're not just scheduling around them. You can only dive at slack tide, so you've got the flood and the ebb. And, at peak high or peak low, everything slows down, and then it just stops before it reverses. And that's the only time where it's diveable. Outside of that, the current's so strong, you just get picked up and, you're flapping like a flag. You can't get anything done, but you can't even really get to the bottom. And this image on the right shows we just had an extreme tide one of the days, and I think we couldn't dive for like 3 days. The slack was basically non-existent, so there just was no window. So you'd get most days maybe 1 hour where you could get in the water, maybe 2 if there were 2 windows. And then you also had to align with the freighter traffic. So it was difficult, but we got our days in. Okay, so this is showing the cluster of artifacts on the left there. You can see Diver Cannon 1 and 2, and then all those others. That's the Cannon site, and then the Confederate Cribs site, which is actually in South Carolina. Cannon site belongs to Georgia. The Confederate Cribs are just on the South Carolina side, and so we're actually dealing with two different states for those sites. But you can see where they are in relation to Fort Jackson. They're not that far apart, but two different jurisdictions. This is a map from just after the Civil War, and this sort of puts the whole landscape in perspective. We've got a box illustrating where the CSS Georgia is, and then the Confederate crib obstructions just downriver. Then, of course, you have Fort Jackson, so they're kind of working in concert to keep people from coming upriver. And then just some additional wrecks that were charted on that map. The Confederate crib obstructions themselves, they're pretty highly degraded at this point, and that's not just from time. Obviously, they wanted to open the port back up after the war so they could, make some money, eventually use the river for what they were using it for before. And so they had their own demolition, and surprisingly, I mean, they had divers back then. They had, pretty heavy-duty machinery to pull that stuff down. So that's part of the whole process. It's not just, wood degrading from tornado worms and everything else. It was actively removed. So what we're dealing with now is what's left. So even though it is highly degraded, it's still been recommended eligible for the National Register of Historic Places. Like the CSS Georgia is on the register. So the other wrecks on there, they're just sort of to show you what's going on. They're not necessarily related to this project. But anyway, that sets us up for this next. We're going to show a video that Michael Jordan produced related to the Confederate Cribs. Hi, I'm Will Wilson. I'm an archaeologist with Commonwealth Heritage Group, currently managing an important project here in Savannah for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. We're studying relics of the Civil War hidden beneath the waters of the Savannah River. Following Union victories early in the war, Savannah's Confederate defenders needed to block the Savannah River so the U.S. Navy vessels could not steam up and attack the city. To accomplish this goal, Confederate engineers built rows of what they called cribs, essentially big, tall wooden boxes filled with bricks and rocks, which the Confederates towed out into the river and sank just below the surface. These obstructions made it impossible for any Union forces to reach Savannah, and even now, more than 150 years later, a few of the Confederate cribs remain in the murky waters of the Savannah River. This month, archaeological divers from Commonwealth Heritage Group, contracted by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, are conducting a detailed survey of 4 of the surviving cribs. Our field work began in early October with a sonar sweep of the submerged structures. And hold for a bubble check when you're down. Now we are plunging into the cold, dark waters on every slack tide to make detailed physical examinations. Working from the research vessel Parker, our team includes archaeological hard hat divers as well as a professional support team on the surface.
You're okay, Andy?
Yes, sounds good. I can hear you loud and clear.
We use a real-time video connection and an audio link to communicate with the diver working below.
Oh yeah, I can see it pretty clearly. How far out ahead is it?
The sonar map from October helps us guide the divers to the right spot on the bottom, and a pump on the boat pushes a jet of high-powered water so the divers can clear away sediments and expose the wooden structures they conceal.
No one has touched this in at least over 150 years. So.
That wall broke off, and what we're seeing, what we thought was planned view, like, we're seeing it as it was, is actually, it's fallen over 90 degrees.
When we're finished, the information we have painstakingly collected for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers will answer questions about how the obstructions were constructed and reveal new details about this hidden aspect of Savannah Civil War history.
As Will said, the multi-beam was extremely useful in documenting initially the cribs. And here you can see we've numbered them A, B, C, and D on the multi-beam, which is on the right. and comparing them to the historic 1871 is a post-war, it's actually a U.S. Army Corps of Engineers engineering map, post-war obstruction map to figure out, what they had to do, as the engineers still do today. So we numbered them A, B, C, D, and there's E. We also recorded on the multi-beam, but it's not shown here. And there's also probably an F up there. You can see the little black square on the historic map. But employing that, and the also on the maps, there were the construction drawings of these cribs. So our intent was, in documenting these cribs, was to correlate and contrast and compare to the historical document. As far as crib D, we uncovered what would be the corner on the left. You can see the corner construction, and on crib C, all that was left was the lowest layer of what would be shown on the right figure. And here's crib D. You can see once again, it's the multi-beam image. The orange is just scattered brick. It's all deflated. They probably stood, and we don't know specifically because we don't know the exact water depth, but these cribs were 40 foot square and approximately that high, maybe not quite that high. We don't know if they were exposed at both low and high tide, but they were probably exposed at low tide. That's an assumption on our part. We do not know. But again, crib D, in comparing and contrasting what's left on site, and all we had was one section of it, which was the corner, and basically it was an exact mirror image to the historic map. Now crib C, on the other hand, we didn't have a corner, but what we had was the lowest level of the crib, and we show where it's at on that crib, and you can see the dark area. That is, those are planks, and what we have is on top of the planks, it was tons of bricks that we dug through, and then underneath the planks, it was sterile sand and Miocene clay, which is the base of the river, and that basically told us we were at the bottom of the crib, and it compared completely with, not quite this drawing, this just shows you where it's at within the structure, but on the previous drawing that shows you that it indeed was planked. And that was basically the documentation of the cribs. They're currently dredging the channel. They have taken most, if not all, of crib D away. It's no longer extant, and what we, as archaeologists, we go in and we effectively document things, and then they can be destroyed. They can be taken away because we have the documentation in hand, and that's why we do this, so they can widen the channel, and shown here is the red line. That's the widener, and they go up slope, and they've taken out crib D. They will not approach or touch crib C. It's intact. But basically, there's very little of the cribs left. They are recommended as eligible for the National Register of Historic Places, and they effectively helped, along with the CSS Georgia, which was just upstream, kept the Union at bay, the Union fleet out of Savannah, and so Savannah could not be taken until Sherman effectively came in by land. So they're pretty significant. Documentation and recovery of the cannon scatter site. The multi-beam on the left shows you all the cannon that we see on the multi-beam, and they were initially discovered with the dredging, 3 cannon, all of the same type. And now I believe we will go into the video and watch that, and then we'll come back and talk more about the cannon.
Rare relics from an important period in early Georgia history rose from the Savannah River in January 2022, as archaeologists completed recovery of 15 cannon believed to be from more than one Revolutionary War shipwreck. The mystery first unfolded in late February 2021, when a dredge unexpectedly sucked up 3 iron guns and fragments of anchors at a deep spot in front of Old Fort Jackson known as 5 Fathom Hole.
It was a surprise. This was completely unexpected. They thought that dredging had occurred in this area several times, and it was clear that it had, but none of these materials had ever been brought up before.
But there'd been so much dredging in the river that I don't think anybody really expected this. They've survived all the dredging. That was probably the biggest surprise.
Early suspicions focused on the HMS Rose, a famous British warship intentionally sunk here in 1779. But research quickly discounted that possibility, since historical documents show the Rose was sunk further upriver, and more importantly, that all of her weapons were removed prior to sinking. British archives indicate that the weapons on the river bottom were actually the remains of 2 or more commercial vessels used to transport British troops, ships that were also sunk to block the river when a large enemy fleet suddenly appeared off Tybee Island.
The French had blockaded the port of Savannah, getting ready to attack. So they scuttled these troop transports to keep the French out and, basically save the city early on from being taken over. They plugged the channel to where the ships could not come up, the French could not come up and take the city.
Dredging in the area was halted, and sonar surveys revealed the presence of more than a dozen more cannon scattered on the river bottom at 5 Fathom hold. The Savannah District U.S. Army Corps of Engineers brought in a team of experts highly regarded for their earlier work raising the wreckage of the Civil War ironclad CSS Georgia nearby.
They were already familiar with this territory, so they were the perfect fit for this project.
Step 1 for the archaeologist from Commonwealth Heritage Group was to create a detailed map of the artifacts, combining sonar with hands-on measurements by trained archaeological divers.
Hey Jim, can you get us the measurement from the muzzle to that possible trunnion?
Then it was time for salvage divers from Savannah-based Commercial Dive and Marine Services to get to work bringing these historical artifacts to the surface. Dives in the middle of the busy shipping channel could only take place at high or low tide, and only if no freighters were passing overhead. And even then, the work was next to impossible.
Putting the divers on the cannon was difficult. We had to use high-tech positioning equipment to get them back on things and make sure we're in the right location.
But we had to kind of run in and out when the tides and the vessel traffic ceased, kind of when all the stars aligned.
The tide turns and it turns like that. You got zero viz. The current's ripping you. You're holding on for dear life half the time trying to hike your way through down there. It's been a race against the clock. Every time you get in the water, you're racing the clock.
One by one, the divers managed to get sturdy slings beneath the heavy cannon.
There it is.
Then the team used inflatable lift bags to wrench the guns from the thick mud on the bottom.
We add pressure to it, and sometimes it takes a while for that cannon to work its way out of the mud. But once it surfaces, we know we got it. We pull it in, tie it off to the boat, and move it.
The cannon were gently placed back on the river bottom at a safe, shallow spot near Hutchinson Island while the recovery work continued. Then, on January 18, 2022, a big crane hoisted them out of the water and into metal troughs which were trucked the short distance over to the Corps of Engineers depot.
Getting everything out of the water and taking away especially a lot of the uncertainties with dealing with vessel traffic, weather, and everything else that goes along with the environment out there. A big relief, big breath of fresh air.
The next day, archaeologists and other experts spent hours taking a closer look at the artifacts.
It's a little hard to make out, but I think I got it here. It starts at 8 inches from center of trunnion.
Okay.
And ends at 9.
Basically, you look at the measurements, and we always refer to a cannon by its total length. Total length is from after the cascable to the front of the muzzle face. And all these measurements can get put into a database, and you compare them to known cannon from known cannon manufacturers. So you get more and more knowledge, and the more knowledgeable you are, the more informed you are.
Concealed beneath centuries of concretion were real surprises, even for these veteran archaeologists.
I had assumed every one of those cannons were nearly identical. And now that we're measuring, we're starting to see some real differences.
The river also yielded up other smaller but equally important artifacts, including several pieces of bar shot, a type of ammunition that looks a lot like a modern dumbbell.
It's basically 2 half cannonballs with a bar in between it, and they're 12 inches to 16 inches in length. And this thing spins through the air. If you're firing at the rigging, it breaks all the rigging, or it hits the mast of the ship. You've got a greater chance of hitting the mast of the ship with a bar.
Also recovered, fragments of ship's hardware.
The main artifacts you find there are anchors. We have so many pieces of anchors of all different sizes and shapes. It's pretty amazing.
The story is still unfolding. Once the research is complete, there's more work to be done.
We are going to identify a few that would be great candidates for conservation, and we are going to try to conserve those. We hope that they will be put on exhibit locally in Savannah so that people can see them, and we're just interested to learn more about the story. So hopefully it'll shine a light on the Revolutionary War period in Savannah and how it was saved from the French.
Reporting from Savannah, I'm Michael Jordan for the Savannah District, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers.
Okay, the cannon scatter site. It's right upstream from Fort Jackson. Picture on the right, you can see Fort Jackson. You can see the cannon scatter. The Georgia's right, kind of north of that, and that is an area known as 5 Fathom Hole that we've come to find. And in our initial research, this map right here was produced by or drawn by the admiral of the French fleet, Admiral Estaing. I'm not sure how you pronounce his name, but it basically shows the vessels in the harbor at the time. You can see Savannah, those are all British vessels. You see one scuttled vessel just downstream from there that may or may not be the Rose. I think it's a little far down, but then the French fleet is all the way down just at and below Fort Jackson. You've got vessels to the high north, that would be French as well. They've come around, but they could not come through that cut right there, which we'll talk about here shortly. Initial thoughts by some was that the cannon originated from the HMS Rose. The HMS Rose being a sixth-rate frigate, 20 guns, fairly famous. It initially blockaded the Narragansett Bay in Rhode Island early on in the war, which was one of the main import locations for gunpowder, which the American forces, the rebels, dearly needed and were very short of. The Rose played a significant role in staunching the flow of powder into the colonies. Here was another role it played in the battles along the Hudson River to basically drive Washington and his troops out of New York. But our initial thoughts were not my thoughts, but initially people thought it might be the Rose. But in doing our research, the historic maps show that the Rose pictured here, it's the same. The lower panel is an excerpt of the upper panel, and the upper panel shows the city of Savannah. You can see all the little parks that are still here in the most beautiful, city along the coast, in my opinion. But you see the gun emplacements, the earthworks around the city. The arrow points to the location of the Rose, which in the excerpt is right here. English frigate Rose was sunk. And the actual documents tell us that it was sunk in the Rex Channel, which we know to be near the city of Savannah, not down towards Fort Jackson. The documents also state that all of her guns were removed and put on the gun emplacements, the earthworks around the city, and her sailors manned the guns. The guns were put in place. The American forces were coming by land. The French fleet was coming by the river. And its scuttling there disallowed the French from coming through Rex Channel and bombarding the city, thereby assisting the rebel forces and effectively turning the tide in the battle at the Siege of Savannah, which some say may be the bloodiest battle in the Revolution. And her guns, we have an earthenwork, I believe, it's out this door, it's out on this side of the museum. Heck, the Rose guns could have been on that earthenwork right here. But they were somewhere around the city. But discounting the Rose, we come to the fact that we know that the HMB, His Majesty's Brig Savannah, which was a 14-gun brig, it was scuttled with all her guns, and she had at least 14, and potentially the armed transport Venus and a couple of other transports. They were sunk at 5 Fathom hole, which you can see in the lower panel is just opposite Fort Jackson. You can see the name 5 Fathom hole, or exactly 5 Fathom hole, which a fathom is 6 feet. It was an anchorage. And it was an historic anchorage for a long time, and you can see the little anchor symbols that show that it is an anchorage. And they were scuttled at 5 Fathom hole, and this is exactly where the cannon are located, just opposite and just a little upriver from Fort Jackson. So the top panel shows 5 Fathom hole where the cannon are located, and then the Rex channel where the Rose is located. And the line of fire on the previous slide showed that the angle from those gun emplacements would have put it there as well. And we're 2 miles downriver from the city of Savannah, and you effectively can't fire into, from the city 2 miles away. This is just a satellite photo showing the scuttling location of the transports and where we think the HMS Rose is at. We think it is now, I'm sorry, I should have taken this off a long time ago. We think it's under land. It could be under the core depot, which is in the left-hand square, you can see the white area, that's the core depot. And we think that's where she's at. The City of Savannah is right to the left, and then the scuttling location opposite Fort Jackson for the transports. The cannon recovery, as the video indicated, it was conducted by Commercial Diving and Marine Services. Several of the folks are here in the audience. You may have noticed them. This is a shot from Fort Jackson. You can see the dive boat. The channel marker up in the upper right is actually marks the side of the CSS Georgia, the Confederate ironclad. So they recovered them with lift bags. That video that they showed of that thing popping to the surface, that was pretty cool. They towed them up to the city and or up to the depot and raised them and transferred into tanks where they were all analyzed and documented. This Dr. Gordon Watts, he's pretty much an expert on cannon, along with Will Wilson documenting them. And so in documenting the cannon, we realized, and there's a total of 15 cannon. We have 2 types. There's 3 long guns of 70 inches and 12 short guns of 60 inches. The long guns are an Armstrong-style cannon. The short guns, we don't have any correlates for them. It's a strange gun. We've never seen it in the archaeological record. We don't see it historically in any images. And we're kind of perplexed on where it may have been manufactured. They're both 6-pounders. That means their bore's about 3.5 inches in diameter. Here's a great shot that kind of shows the difference in the 2 types of guns. And I would like to assume that they're all from the Savannah, but we can't say that for a fact, especially since they're of two different types, and there are 15, whereas the Savannah was a 14-gun ship. This is just an image of that Armstrong-style cannon, and these are, in fact, this gun is from the what's called the storm rack. And as archaeologists, you look for those correlates to compare and contrast your artifact types and cannon are an artifact type. The storm wreck was off St. Augustine, Florida, and it, in fact, they surmised that it was one of numerous British transports that were evacuating loyalists fleeing Charleston. And Savannah had been evacuated several months prior to that. Charleston evacuated a little bit after. A storm hit when they were off the mouth of St. Augustine and sank a number of vessels. And the folks who excavated this wreck seem to think this was a British transport, and it matches our cannon to the T. Approximately half the cannon were plugged with wooden plugs in their muzzle called a tampion. Here you can see the wood rings. That effectively, the wooden plugs keep the moisture out, keep salt water out. They can be armed. They can be. They all probably still have cannonballs in them. Do they have a sack of powder in them? That's unknown until they get to the conservation lab to check it out. Oftentimes they would put a ball in and kind of oil it up and put the plug in, and as the ship rocked back and forth, the ball would slide up and down and keep the barrel clean as you want all your, even today, your barrels clean in whatever gun you're using. The other things recovered, you saw the cannon shot recovered by some of the divers. There's absolutely no other evidence of vessel down there. There's no rigging, there are no rudder parts, there's no wood, and it's kind of amazing that there's nothing left. Although when you think about all the dredging that's gone on, and then there's the teredo worm. It's actually a bivalve that eats wood down there, and it will just eat whatever shipwreck is down there, and it'll eat it till it's gone. So it's not surprising. It's surprising, but it's not. The munitions, the circular bar shot right here up on the table, some of you guys might have picked it up. The problem with that is its diameter indicates that it's a 4-pounder. It's not from any of the cannon we have, but that's not necessarily an oddity. Ships and shipwreck sites often have munitions that don't fit their cannon. And the reasons for that can be multiple. They've gotten rid of that cannon, or they're brought on shot expecting to have the cannon, or they're using it for ballast. 3 of our cannon, by the way, are broken. The muzzles are broken off. We do have one muzzle piece. Were those cannon broken by the dredge? Probably not. The cannon, when a cannon explodes, and it's not it's an often occurrence. It doesn't happen, totally often, but it's often enough that we had several on the Georgia that had their muzzles blown off. They take those cannon and they're not usable, and they put them in the hold as ballast. So were they used as ballast, or we just don't know, or were they broken by the dredge? The other hemispherical shot, those were all 6-pounders. They're up here. We have 2 types. We actually have one that's a double. You can see it's a little bigger than the others, and it pulls apart and creates 2 rotating, a much deadlier and effective bar shot. And then the 6-pounder solid shot that fits the 3.5-inch bore of all our cannon. And it's most likely from our cannon, but again, you can't say for certain that the munitions are from these cannon and from the guns, but there's a high likelihood of them being from our vessel. Where we're at now is research focuses on the HMS Savannah, the 14-gun transport. We're looking for the captain's log, which would be the Royal Navy Lieutenant Richard Fisher. He manned that ship when it was scuttled. He went on to be a very successful Royal Naval officer, commanding huge ships of the line, up to 70 cannon. We think, and we're pretty certain, that his log will be at the Maritime Museum in Greenwich, England, along with possibly the Venus and The Rose may be there. We're just now into the research to try and uncover those logs. And in conclusion, there's a total of 15 cannon recovered from the site. There may be one or two that lay buried still, and maybe the dredging that's now ongoing may uncover. We'll see. We do know that they're from British troop transports that were scuttled September 20th. Possibly, most likely, most or all are from the Savannah. There are two types of cannon, all 6-pounders. Once again, there's no other remnants of the vessels. And the archival research is ongoing. We hope to get into the archives in Britain. And then there's discussions ongoing as we speak about what to do with these cannon. Conservation and curation. It's not a cheap thing, but these are very significant arms. They helped, they were part of one of the bloodiest battles of the American Revolution. I mean, what else can you say? As for the Cribs, Crib D has already been destroyed. We do have the documentation. Crib C will be fine. And if you have any questions, we're ready to take questions and answers. And then Andrea, did you want to say something about the conservation? Yeah, okay, right.
So for the conservation, there are still a lot of questions about that. So the cannon are technically under the jurisdiction of the Georgia Department of Natural Resources. We've been working closely with the Office of the State Archaeologist on that because without conservation, we need something to directly tie these guns to something. So we need a distinguishing mark, continued research. You know, we need that piece of information that is that direct link. So at the same time, we are also working with the British attaché at the embassy in DC. They have been incredibly supportive. They're planning a trip down here. You know, hopefully with this research, we'll be able to definitively say who the cannon belonged to. We're also working closely with the Georgia and South Carolina State Historic Preservation Offices. They've been incredibly supportive throughout this entire process. With conservation, Steve mentioned it is very expensive, and the key to conservation is that you have to have somewhere for these cannon to go, and you've got to know, are they going to be stored? Are they going to be exhibited outside? You know, the way you conserve them depends on where they're going and how they're going to be used. So we've been trying to partner with some local organizations to see if they can take some. Again, right now we're looking at a representative sample, and the key and why we want to do that is to try and pick the ones that we think can link it back to a specific vessel. And I will stop. I know that Sandra Baxter, if you would like to say a few words, especially we appreciate you hosting this event tonight.
Hey, I'm so glad to see you all here tonight. It's really great to see this many people from the community come out and learn about this. I'm just really delighted that we were able to host this here. If you don't know, I'm Sandra Baxter, I'm CEO of Coastal Heritage Society. CHS operates 6 museums in Savannah. We have Pinpoint Heritage Museum, Harbor Folks House, Old Fort Jackson, which you've seen, and then here in Tricentennial Park downtown, we have Savannah History Museum, where we're sitting, Georgia State Railroad Museum across the street, which also contains Savannah Children's Museum. And as has been mentioned, the Battlefield Memorial Park is sort of the keystone piece of Tricentennial Park, where the Revolutionary War battle happened in 1779. And it is through those doors and across the street. So we are literally sitting on part of that historic battlefield. So I think this was a great place for us to be able to gather and learn more about these guns. So, you know, I found out about the 3 original guns probably like most of you did, saw an article on CNN, I think, and thought, wow, this is so exciting. Can you believe this? And a few months passed, and I get a call from Andrea, and she says, "Hey, remember those 3 guns?" And I was like, "Yes, how exciting." She said, "Would you be interested in taking them and having them at one of your museums?" And I was like, "Well, absolutely." So imagine my pause when she said, "Yeah, we found 16, we think." I went, "Oh, great." So, of course, it's incredibly exciting. We started having some conversations. I started having some conversations with my board. There was a lot to learn still at that point, so we kind of talked through the summer, through the holiday. And I'm very, very excited to report that I talked with my board. We actually had our annual retreat this last weekend, and Andrea and I have been able to come up with enough broad stroke lines, areas of agreement that we felt that we could go ahead and come up with a memorandum of understanding. And I presented this concept to my board, and they have voted, based on what we know today, for CHS to accept all of the guns, and we will put them on display here in Savannah. Thank you. Thank you. We're tremendously excited about this opportunity. And because the battlefield is right here, 3 times a week, 3 days a week, we offer programming where we take people out to Loyalist and Liberty, we take them through the museum, we take them across the street onto the battlefield and really help our guests understand the events of that war here in Savannah. And this is it's an old train shed that we're sitting in. The museum is a long linear building with windows that face out onto the battlefield. And the idea is that we will be able to display these guns basically within those windows, so they will be sitting in a place where we can talk about them while you see the battlefield before you go out onto the battlefield. So I think it's going to be a really tremendous opportunity for us to expand the story of the Revolution here in Savannah, not only what happened here on the battlefield, but the naval story, which was very important as well. So I'm glad that a couple times our prior speaker mentioned the cost of conserving cannons. They are not all going to be conserved, so we will be doing some fundraising for that. There are 15 cannons, so there are 15 opportunities for you or your organization to sponsor a cannon. I am further pleased to say that in the retreat this weekend, our CHS board also committed, has pledged the first of those cannons. So one of those is already pledged to be restored. So that was very grateful to our board for that, so thank you. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over. If any of you or your organization are interested in helping us to conserve these guns and help us create exhibits to tell the story of what they are, why they're here, then please come talk to me after this is over. So, all right, thank you.
I know we're running a little long on time, so if you have to leave, we understand, but we want to allow some time for questions, and I'm sure we'll all have to stand up for these. So any questions from the group? Okay.
In relation to the location of Fort Jackson, was the ironclad found a down channel or up channel?
Directly opposite. So, Fort Jackson's on the south side. The CSS Georgia was on the north side of the channel, and there was 1,000 feet between them or so. Yeah.
I mean, it's totally tongue-in-cheek. I'm Jeff Loomis, president of the Sons of American Revolution here in Savannah. In your presentation, you mentioned the French ships were hindered from attacking Savannah. Might offer a different history. They were hindered from helping America.
Right.
I know the current SHEP project is taking the river from 42 to 47 feet. How deep was the river when these ships were originally scuttled?
Well, it was called the 5 Fathom hole, so that was at least 30 feet.
Yeah, but no, there were deeper areas as well.
Yeah, I've
much
been
deeper.
geo-referencing those maps, and they've got soundings like 45 feet deep prior to dredging, very deep, yeah.
But it was an area that was, you know, there weren't any shoals in it, and it didn't get any shallower, and that's, I believe it was used as the historic anchorage forever.
Hi, if I may, I'm Aaron Bradford. I'm the interpretive supervisor and resource education specialist with the Coastal Heritage Society. And my understanding is that historically the Savannah River was about 12 to 20 feet deep, depending on the tide, which made this natural harbor so important, so remarkable. Because any ships, for example, Union ironclads coming up the river, for example, to attack Savannah, if you get stuck at low tide in the river, then you're in a lot of trouble. So that's one of the reasons why we had soldiers out there on Salter's Island during the American Revolution. They had an earthen fort. One of the reasons why was to defend this important harbor at 5 Fathom Hole. So that's my understanding that historically it was 12 to 20 feet deep, except for 5 Fathom Hole. Now there might certainly be other places along the river, but the other thing is that Fort Jackson is on the most narrow point of the Savannah River. So that makes it a choke point. And so to defend that natural harbor and also to be a choke point made the ground where Old Fort Jackson stands so important. So you're cordially invited to come out here, or I should say at Old Fort Jackson, we have daily cannon firings, and it's been such a thrill to see our partners out there and the amazing work that they've been doing. So thank you.
Yes, sir.
Based on other cannons from the period, do you expect to find foundry marks or any identification on the cannons when they're conserved?
Well, we hope to. You know, often they're there, often they're not. And they're likely on the trunnions where the date of manufacture or the manufacturer would be. Yes, sir.
Was there any kind of evidence that they showed or that was discovered with the cribs that they did? Did they need to transport those cribs to position and then add ballast?
That's correct. That's correct.
What kind of plating did the Georgia have on its side?
Railroad
Iron
iron.
plating.
Railroad iron.
It was railroad.
It was kind of lap straight, one up, one down, and they fit perfectly. You know, you had the straighten in the bulb, and then you had the straight in the bulb, and they fit just, and it created just a flat surface. And they drilled through, and they spiked. They drilled holes through for both drip pins and then spikes on the sides. It's pretty amazing. Yes, sir.
So is there any indication that the decision to scuttle the Savannah was a quick decision? It seems when you're expecting a French and American force on your front, that dropping 14 or so cannon to the bottom of the river was a poor decision.
Well, you know, I'm not an expert on the siege of Savannah, and you know, my understanding of history is often the projects that I'm involved in. But you're correct in the sense that all of the vessels were scuttled on the same day. So to me, that almost infers a quick decision.
Yeah, especially if you compare it, I'm familiar a little bit more with the similar tactic at Yorktown in the York River, and Cornwallis pulled everything off of there. So while they found the ships, there was very few cannon or ammunition or other things with those. They cleaned them up pretty well before they were
And you know,
off.
sinking them with armaments kind of implies that it was a quick decision. Are the commercial diving and marine services personnel here? Uh-huh. There's one. Can we stand up? No, there are other folks here as well. That's Steve Tessier and his lovely family down in front. He's the president. And then Rich Still, who did most of the heavy lifting.
We've got Isaiah Gibbons over here.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, no, it's very much appreciated. You did a great job.
Isaiah did most of the documentation of Cribs.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
When you did the CSS Georgia, a lot of other things came up in the clamshell, like, you know, prehistoric shark teeth
Right.
and Native American artifacts. Did that happen with this as well?
No.
Okay.
No. Not at all. Yeah, the Georgia was kind of odd. You know, there is one of the largest prehistoric assemblages in, I believe, the state. Of the ceramics are just incredible. And why are they there?
Bilbo Island. Bilbo Grounds.
Well, exactly, which is no longer there, right?
It's curated at Georgia Southern Laboratory.
Okay, another assemblage. What are you saying, Bilbo Island?
Texas A&M people, I think, gave it to Georgia.
Oh, right,
Southern.
yeah, right, exactly.
They didn't want the metal, they wanted the metal, but not the iron.
But why is that? Why is that prehistoric site in the middle of the river? It's, you know,
It's just downstream from Bilbo Mountain.
well,
It's one of the oldest in North America.
Well, that may be the answer. I've always scratched my head. Yes, sir.
So when the dredging is completed on the current, how much further below where these cannons were found will be the bottom at that point? And you've mentioned that the sort of sterile soil under the cribs was Miocene. Is that where we'll end up geologically with this, or even below that?
Yes, we're going, I think it's the shoalest point of the cannon side would be 6 foot, but for the most part it's about 5, and the Miocene clay will be the bottom.
And that's what they need that cutter head for. To get in there.
Well, thank you for coming. Oh, one
Is
more.
this presentation on YouTube?
It's being recorded tonight, so yeah, we'll be posting it. The Savannah District Facebook page, we've got a couple of folks from the corporate communications office here, so we'll be posting features. You know, we probably won't have any big announcements or discoveries until we do the conservation, but if anything comes up, we'll be posting it on the Facebook page.
One of them here is that the surveying going on right around the area of Brig, it almost visually looks like there is a major difference based on visual picture. That's a demarcation line.
You mean the blue? That was the channel cut. That's where that cutter head has gone down that many feet.
And it looked like there was almost
A straight wall. That's exactly what it is.
And that was, I know on the nautical maps that says that area is a sediment trap.
The sediment trap is the back river.
Right.
So that's coming.
That's further upriver than the cribs.
Okay, so I just wasn't sure if I was reading it right to say that was just a major difference.
Yep.
No,
It's like a cliff out to the dive.
Ma'am, did you have a question?
I was just wondering, how long do you think that the conservation will take to complete?
Well, I would say a couple years, because the iron gets impregnated with salt, and you know there's some freshwater lens, but salt water as well. There's definitely salt in those cannons, and any salt in the iron has to be brought out, and they'll run electricity through it, and it'll get the salts out, and it'll reconstitute the iron. And then when there's a reading of no salts, and then you're good to go.
And then they have everything, the tampion, everything that's inside it will have to be conserved, and that would take longer.
Yeah, and then they'll have to pull it out
have to
and
do
make
that
sure the
16 times.
pores. Yeah, and then there's a lot to it. But most of it's just sitting in an electrolytic bath.
I see, yeah. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
When will the dredging continue?
It's ongoing. When will it be done?
Maybe Monday or Tuesday.
So when that desalinization process goes on, would it make the surface of the cannon actually be identifiable?
Correct. What it does is it reconstitutes the iron that's like in the concretion in it, and it will allow the concretion to just slough off, and you'll be able to, if they're present and it hasn't corroded to the point where they're not visible, you'll be able to see the maker's mark or the year it was manufactured. But if they're there, I mean, it's possible they weren't marked, but generally they are.
Do you plan to try to find out where the shorter cannon came from?
Absolutely. We're scratching our heads and we're doing a lot of legwork to figure those guys out. We're thinking they're British manufacturer. maybe the Karen company, but there are a lot of cannon foundries in England.
They also use French and Spanish cannons.
Right, they
captured them.
Yeah, when they're captured, cannons moved around a lot. That's exactly correct.
So when is that guy coming from Washington, the British?
Oh, we're still planning that.
Are you still planning?
Yeah, probably maybe a month or two. And they don't, I will say, a question that comes up a lot is like, well, do they want them back? And no, they don't want them back. The goal is to keep them locally, because it's part of the history here.
But so you think that he'll be able to help you identify possibly?
Their archives department have given us resources, but really they're just interested. They're happy to help. Yeah.
We might ask for their help and point them in that right direction, or and that's an excellent idea, and we've thought of it as well, because they're right there. And Greenwich is just up the river from London, and that's where those logs are at.
Well, I thought we might learn something more after he came here, but maybe he's learning more from us.
Yeah, he's coming to see him just like you. Yeah.
And I think we have a better handle on what vessel they're from, as opposed to the Rose. And
how can we follow along with what you find out? Kind of like this, are you planning on additional presentations, or is there or any online resources or anything? How are you going to publish your findings?
Yeah, we'll probably be posting things on the Savannah District Facebook page as well as the website. That'll probably, and I'm sure some local events will come up that we'll host that we can speak more on it as well.
And then our subsequent report, it often, not initially, but it will be posted. I think that like the CSS Georgia is out there, that may be an avenue as well. And you guys are welcome to pick up the cannonball one more time before you leave. Are those chicken wings gone?
Thank you.
Maybe you see like some that solid on the sound of like a